Hello. We want to make a video discussing a topic which has come up with a number of friends of ours and has also been, it seems like an issue for some of the people on our Facebook page as well. And so we kind of want to address this topic of whose authority are we under and why are we under that authority? And so one of the things that always comes up is the idea of this verse in Matthew 18:18, where Yeshua famously says to Shimon Kepha, whatever you loose in heaven whatever you loose on earth will be loose in heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. And so this is a verse which is largely misunderstood by what Yeshua is saying, and it's taken to mean a whole bunch of things which have caused unfortunate misunderstandings, both in the Christian world and also in the Jewish world. And so, in the Jewish world, this idea of mutering and osering is a common one. It is something that is commonly understood. There seems to be very little confusion about this topic. One of the really interesting things about this topic is you can go through and you can see a number of rabbis declaring either wigs to be mutter or aser, or like my wife is wearing right here, a hat, a snood, to be aser or mutter, and which aser and mutter. Aser literally means bound, mutter means loosed, and permitted and forbidden. Loose meaning, so mutter is forbidden, or mutter is permitted, loosed, all those kinds of things, and aser is forbidden and bound. So
it can also mean sin too, right? Like it's aser to.
No, that's in the vernacular. That's not actually what it means. So to do something that's aser is a sin, but it does not necessarily mean sin. So these are the things that are sort of coming up, right? So this is used all the time in Judaism, and Judaism goes on, and they have the law of Moses, which was taught in by Moses and passed down, and there were judges who ruled on it, as we see in Exodus 18, where Yisro, we're coming up on that in a couple of weeks. Yisro says to Moses, this is too much for you. I'll appoint judges over 50s and hundreds and tens. And this is the process of interpreting the law, which was given down from Hashem at Mount Sinai. And so all the Holy Spirit, the Ruach Chodesh, goes with these men, and they make rulings, on laws, and it continues on and on up to the time of Yeshua and beyond the time of Yeshua. So Yeshua is sitting there and he's talking to his disciples, and he says, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loose in heaven. And so does that mean now that the authority of binding and loosing, of declaring this mutter and that aser, does that now go to the church? We would emphatically say no. It stays within the idea of Judaism. What he's simply doing is he's passing on to his disciples the idea of muttering and osering, depending on new things that come up. There's been a lot of new things since Yeshua made this ruling, and so we need specific guidance in who gets to determine whether it's mutter or aser.
Is he passing along his particular? Is this him passing along his particular teachings to his disciples specifically, like you're taking my teachings, or is he just saying in a general manner?
I would say it is both office and teachings as well. Okay. So in the Christian realm of things, the idea of this succession is typically taken to be either an office, a actual physical place, a person, or at teachings as well. And I would say that yes, it's both. It is both teachings and also the office. We see this in Judaism as well, right? So the Gedolei Hadar passes on his teachings. There's a rabbi who comes up and eventually is able to replace him if all goes well, and then is able to further on those teachings, and it continues in the idea of Musar. of the Masorah, not Musar. And so this is an idea that I think he passes on. And there's a few rules behind that. I'm not going to get into all the rules and all the minutia of it. But one of the rules is that you can never argue on Moses. And so we would argue that Yeshua also would hold to this opinion and this rule, and that you can never argue on Moses. And somewhere down the line, it obviously changed from that. And
in terms of church tradition,
in terms of church tradition, yes,
Christian
understanding of what this verse means. That Christians typically take this to mean now that the church can say anything, and Moses is no longer in the equation according to church history. And so we would argue that no, Moses and the system that Yisro and Moses set up to determine the functionings of the law is what he was passing on to his disciples, to his Talmudim, if you will. And that office and that law would be passed on from Yeshua to Shimon Kefa, from Shimon Kefa down through the generations. The one principle that has gotten lost is the attachment to Moshe Rabbeinu. And so obviously he's teaching an idea that is familiar to Judaism, and in its logical historical context would be a further endorsement of Judaism, not an endorsement of a separate entity, which is typically understood as the church fathers, but that it would be this idea of, in Judaism, this rabbinic tradition, which we've passed from Rabbi Yeshua down to Rabbi Shimon Kefa, all the way down the line. But it would follow Judaism and be in strict adherence with the system and the laws of Moshe Rabbeinu.
Right.
You have any questions for me?
Well, that's how, in terms of Yeshua, in terms of his teachings, that's how the fellow Pharisees and people in general of that day, because he's obviously talking to Jews, so they're going to be judging if he were to go and teach something contradictory to Moses, they would, according to Deuteronomy 13, is it 13 or 7?
Deuteronomy 13, yeah.
13. He would be automatically disqualified. So he's from being any kind of rabbi or certainly Mashiach. So they would be using that. So whatever Yeshua's rulings are or teachings are, it has to, the commonly known as Sermon on the Mount. He's teaching on various different topics, and he says such and such has been said, but I say this. But he can't say it. It's not like he can't have new teachings, but it can't contradict. So how would that work in terms of maybe some, he says, you've heard it said, like, talking about an eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and then he expands upon that and what he would teach on that. But it's not necessarily that he's not contradicting what Moses said there. So what is he doing there?
Yeah, so I mean, it's common misperception in Christianity as well as others of eye for an eye being a literal thing. In Judaism, it's actually taught eye for eye means something completely different. Not that it's eye for eye, and he's actually continuing in that tradition of understanding the eye for eye principle of it's a much deeper meaning, a place of not putting a stumbling block before another, of midas keneged mido. So in the same way that you violate is the same way that you are going to be disciplined, if you will.
So with all those teachings and that particular Matthew 5-8, he's not contradicting Moses.
He's not just contradicting Moses.
Right. So and so the people listening are obviously all Jews that are going to be. So he's bringing forth that, I guess, not sewed level, but what level would he be bringing?
He'd be bringing a bunch of different ideas there.
Right. I'm just trying to get the authority aspect. So as he's teaching, people are going to be judging him in regards to what he is teaching, and therefore his disciples are teaching. So here he's saying, I'm passing along my teachings to you and my authority to you. But it has to, as you said, has to agree with Moshe.
Moshe, yeah.
And if it doesn't, our interpretation is wrong.
Yes.
So I guess the practical question would be, what is the practical implications of this authority to like our life? Because you're, not
Right. So if Yeshua is fundamentally bound to Moses and the Pharisaic sages, then we are also bound to Moses and the Pharisaic sages. There is something interesting that goes on for a little bit as far as, and we see this in Acts 15, we see this in a number of other places with the respect to office and teachings. The idea of we follow his teachings and the teachings of his disciples as they come into play, as long as it's in accordance with Moses. And so that continues on at least a little bit in the book of Acts, and also I believe in Paul's epistles as well, with the idea of the continuing teaching of not being in violation of Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah.
So what is, on that note, what is Paul for the most part is writing to Gentiles, so how does that authority work in relation to what he's trying to do?
So you have B'nai Noach, which comes into the 7 laws of B'nai Noach. 7 laws of B'nai Noach are 7 laws for Gentiles who wish to worship a singular God, the God of Israel, but not convert. And so they have 7 laws that they need to establish. One of them being that there's no idolatry, the other being that they do not eat limbs of living animals, that they do not participate in immorality, they do not steal, they set up courts of justice. I'm blanking on the last 2. But there's 7 principles which are set up, which are primarily for the Gentiles. And so Paul is dealing largely with the B'nai Noach community. We're getting a little bit off topic here. But he's dealing with the B'nai Noach community, aspect. And the authority goes through the ones that it's been passed down to. We see it as the office when they come to Yaakov, the brother who has the final authority in the office. He's in the place of Rebbe Yeshua. And so he has the authority to make those decisions, and he does.
Okay. Yeah, I was just asking the question because of you do have today some who hold that like Jews and Gentiles abide by the same rules and laws and things like that when it comes to Moses and things. So
right. So pork is okay for a non-Jew to eat. Pork is not okay for a Jew to eat. So another example that is kind of a funny one is eggs are permissible for Jews. Eggs are not permissible, according to some opinions, for Gentiles. And so that's a typical understanding of that in relation to the B'nai Noach. But again, that's getting a bit off topic. We really want to focus on what he says to Jews,
right,
who would be under the full weight of the Rabbinic,
right, because he's
Pharisaic authority.
He's passing along to
Jews,
Shimon, Kefa, and so forth.
Right.
So how, in relation to our discussion, how should a believer, let's say a Jewish believer, relate to the church fathers in this context? Like
where they don't disagree with Moses, follow them. Where they do disagree with Moses, you can't follow them anymore. And so a Jewish follower would not follow the church fathers in that aspect. They would go back to the rabbis to follow regarding Torah.
Okay. And any and on the other flip side of the coin, there are a non-Jewish follower of Yeshua because they're following a Rebbe. So would that just be the laws of Noach and then
laws of Noach, which are kind of expounded upon, but again, that's getting really off the topic of the idea of Masorah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think that covers our particular.
Okay.
Unless you have anything else to.
No, that's good. All right. Until next time.